Hello everyone and welcome to what is probably going to end up being two videos. This is going to be one exercise called using imagery and video. This exercise is really going to sort of parallel what we're trying to do with Project 4. Project 4, as you've probably read from last week, the basis, the sort of backbone of it is real and unreal. How do we sort of intermix the idea of raster-based graphics and then potentially video into what is, for the most part been considered a vector-based world up to this point in terms of how you've done your projects 1, 2, and 3. So let's quickly take a look at Project 4. Again, this is called Real and Unreal Narrative. For this project, you're going to combine both visually and in the narrative sense a mixture of elements that are real, that's photographic imagery, and elements that are unreal, animated vector graphics. You should consider how these elements interact and react to each other. The photographs can and should do many things, including set the scene, introduce a character, reveal a portion of the narrative, and move the story along. They can also be incorporated with text, sound, and/or mass in order to take advantage of previous exercises and projects. Please keep in mind the idea of narrative. I'm going to come back to that in a second. The idea is to tell a simple story that's both engaging, both visually and conceptually. Make sure both aspects, vector-based and photographic, play an important role. It is often a useful tactic to acknowledge the real and unreal as a dilemma the movie is trying to unfold. So you're doing one 45-second, this is a longer project, animated file. It must contain 5 raster-based graphics. That's 5 photographs. Photographic images you have taken, not images you have taken off the internet. I can't stress that enough. And vector-based animated graphics and sound. So please pay attention to the basic requirements here, both the time as well as the requirements in terms of graphics. You're going to make a SWIFT. This is due on the 19th, which is in 2 weeks, so you have a little bit longer time. Going back to this idea of narrative, a couple times in critiques and in discussions, and I sort of noted this off to the side with some people via email, some of these films are quite good technically speaking, but in terms of the narrative, we don't know what the heck is going on. I've written often things that, say something like, I don't know what's going on, as have your classmates, to maybe the more subtle, but still sort of in that ballpark, which is this seems like part of something, but maybe not a whole. The idea is that this is a whole for the most part, that we see something happening, starting and finishing. It can sort of reference another part potentially, or that this is sort of a smaller part of a whole, but we should be able to ingest this thing, understand it on its own. Okay, this is going to become very important as we move towards your final project, which I'm going to be introducing, believe it or not, next week, prior to Project 4 being done, to sort of, make this last push. We really have 4 or 5 more weeks, and we have a lot to do in terms of these 2 projects. We're going to be doing this exercise. I am likely going to have one quick exercise on sound next week, but for the most part, you should be working on this project, until it's due on the 19th. Now, a couple things to think about in relation to this exercise. Again, I'm introducing both the idea of raster-based imagery you would take with a phone, with a digital camera, and again, these are images you have taken, so you should be taking imagery that coincides with the narrative or what it is you're trying to do with this project. I have a couple pictures I've brought in. One is just this tree, and it's just a picture of a tree. It's a JPEG. Okay, you can sort of see part of it there. I have this tiny tree, which I'm going to talk to you about in a second. And I also have a movie clip of a soccer ball rolling. Okay. For the most part, you can use, and I'll post these, particularly this tree.jpg. For your exercise, are going to have to make your own ball. It doesn't have to be perfect. I just want you to sort of understand the concept behind this. Now, if we back up and think about this, and we've thought about this in relation to the bird, or I forget what it's called, I guess movie clip, the bird flying. We brought in actually a JPEG on that, and we used the 3 stages of that bird flying. We traced it and then used the sort of colored lines that we needed in order to get that animation moving. What we're going to do is use this tree.jpg image, and let's just imagine this is an image you have taken and you want to bring in as sort of a scene in a movie. We need to sort of get this into a vector-based situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that same trace bitmap in order to get that done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a new symbol, and I'm going to call it tree graphic. Okay, like we did with that with the bird image. I'm going to plop it down, and I'm taking tree.jpg and I'm plopping it down onto tree graphic. Okay, I'm going to zoom out, and all I'm going to do is use that modify bitmap trace bitmap. Okay, and I think this usually defaults to 108. I'm going to click OK and see how that does. Okay, I think it did an okay job. If I wanted to, I could modify trace bitmap, and what I could do is I could lower that minimum area of pixels, and watch what happens when I do this. Okay, it's sort of hard to tell, but you can go back in the video. You should see a little more detail in this sort of tree image. Okay, now what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to zoom in. First and foremost, we should be able to tell that this is something that is now a vector-based graphic. Okay, I want this actually to be a little more descriptive, so I'm going to go to modify bitmap trace bitmap, and let's see here. I'm going to try a couple different numbers. Let's do the color threshold is 25 and 2. And you'll see this is going to take a little bit longer. And what I'm doing is I'm asking for a more descriptive version of this image. Okay, there we got it. This is going to take up a little more memory, but you'll see that I have a more photographic thing. Okay, now what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to sort of delete the sky. Okay, and I do that, and you'll remember that we did this on the bird JPEG, where we basically got rid of the white background. I'm basically getting rid of the sky here. You're going to see that this is going to become useful once I get into the video portion, but for now I'm going to quickly get rid of this stuff in order to have just the tree. I'm also going to sort of tidy up with the eraser. Okay, this looks like a photograph, but it is not. It is a sort of vector-based graphic. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to do a pretty good job. Okay, you'll notice if I zoom in, we can really see the sort of detail of this in the sort of vector sense. I'm going to just tidy up real quick. All right, spend forever. All right, let's zoom out. Okay, I now have an image that is basically the ground and the tree. Okay, it's not perfect. This is an exercise for your movies. I would hope and assume that you take a little bit more time on this in terms of how those edges are sort of cleaned up, etc. But I'd say we're pretty good for here. Okay, remember we're in the tree graphic, and this is what we're going to use for our scene. Okay, so I'm going to hop over to scene 1. And I'm going to name this layer tree. And what we're going to do is grab tree graphic, and we're going to pop it down here. Take a second. And I'm going to position it on the stage. Since this is a vector-based graphic now, we can actually size it up a little bit. Okay, this is going to come into play later when I talk about what we can't size up. Okay, you'll notice I have a little blip over there, but that's off stage, so I'm not going to worry about that so much. Okay, now what I want to do is create a very, very simple scene, which is basically this rolling soccer ball going sort of across the stage. Okay, so I'm going to go up to frame 60. I'm going to insert a frame. Okay, all that does is sort of extend my tree out 60 frames. This should be a quick little video. Next thing I want to do is insert this rolling ball. Okay, so I'm going to insert a new layer. And later it's going to become important sort of the order of these things, but for now we'll sort of keep them as is. So I'm going to take my rolling ball, and my rolling ball is simply a movie clip. Okay, I don't care if you use a soccer ball. I don't care if you draw a little ball. Make sure the ball has some features on it in order for me to sort of see that it is rotating. But you'll notice that this is simply rotating one time. Okay, and I've done that by creating a movie clip and then rotating that clip one time. Again, this should hopefully be review at this point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the rolling ball and put it over here on stage right. I'm going to look at the ball and realize it's too big, so I'm going to crank it down a good deal. And I'm going to position it right here. And then I'm going to simply create a motion tween. Okay. And I'm going to pull this guy across here. Okay. Now, at this point, I want to position things in terms of the layers in order to sort of see depth and understand depth. So what I'm going to do is move that, whoops, move that rolling ball layer behind the tree. Okay. Now, this is going to become important when we add the video, but first let's just sort of test this and see sort of how the speed is going. Okay, so we have the tree, a static thing. It looks somewhat photographic, but at this point we have the sort of ball rolling across. I'd say the ball's a little sort of comically large, so I'm going to sort of change the size of that a little bit. It's a little bit smaller. And position it a little bit. All right, let's try that again. All right, now just to review this before we get into the video, I basically have a tree graphic that I trace bitmapped, okay, and I got rid of the sky. Okay, I used both clicking on the sort of blocks of color with the black selection tool and deleting, as well as using the eraser to sort of get rid of that background. Okay, I also have a movie clip that is simply 16 frames long of a ball rotating. You need to make a ball of your own and rotate it. Okay, a sort of flat colored green ball that has no features on it. I'm not going to be able to tell that it is rolling because a sort of flat graphic will simply look flat without some features. So put some features on it, some dots, some polka dots, something so I can tell that it's rolling. Okay. Then I've created a scene of basically that soccer ball going across. Okay. And I've created the sort of hierarchy in the layers here where the tree is on top and the rolling ball is behind it. Okay. I'm going to stop the video here briefly and sort of get ready to load up the video that we're going to use for the background. I'm sort of combining two different things here, but the idea is that we're using, what I'll call real-life photographic imagery and video. Okay, that's the basis for your project. One little side note, the thing that I did in terms of trace bit mapping, you don't have to do to your imagery. If sort of plopping that tree down as a JPEG is something that is perfectly fine as is without getting rid of the background, please do so. One thing, and I'll sort of, before I stop the video, I'll sort of note, is using imagery in terms of size. You don't have to do this, I'm just going to show you this. So I'm going to insert a new symbol, I'm going to call it tree 2, and then I have this other image which I'm not going to give you called tiny tree, and this is a teeny tiny JPEG, okay, of an image. This would be an image you took on your phone and is on really low quality or something. When you go to transform an imagery like this, if you're blowing things up like this and stretching things, for lack of a better term, those look awful. They look like crap, okay? Don't do that, okay? If you imagine yourself sort of using something like this In order to use it, you have to do that trace bitmap. Then you can size it. But don't take JPEG imagery and blow it up real big like this. If you're looking at pixelated imagery like this, you're not doing it correctly. Okay, so I'm going to stop it right now and we're going to head into the video portion.